Hey folks, my name is Sarah. I'm the program manager for the Growing Indigenous Storytellers Fellowship. I want to thank you so much for joining this call and also thank our partners on this program, APTN News and the Indigenous Journalists Association. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Just at the top, we're going to do about 25 to 30 minutes of presentation. Then there'll be about 10 minutes of Q&A at the end. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted to YouTube, including the Q&A. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat and I will read them out at the end. Or raise your hand in the Q&A period. Or I understand that Kristy will be looking for a bit of interaction from us. So please just be aware that the meeting is being recorded. And without further ado, I will introduce Kristy, who is a member of Standing Buffalo Dakota Nation, and she teaches in the journalism department at Concordia University. Kristy worked with CBC for 25 years as an anchor and reporter for TV and radio, and then with CTV for 5 years. She loves helping people share their stories. And with that, I will let you take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be here. I'm just going to share my screen. So I'll just take 1 second to do that and we'll be ready to go. So there we go. All right. So that should be up. So thank you so much. And we'll get going. So basically our objectives today, we'll talk about finding the focus of your story. This is one of the things that I find is a bit challenging for emerging journalists. We'll talk about writing active and forward-facing copy. Really important, especially if you're thinking about doing news. We'll talk about writing for the ear, and this is a really important thing when we're talking about broadcast journalism. Because people are busy, people are doing things. We want to make sure that they're able to get as much of the information that we are giving them as they possibly can. And we'll think a little bit about some of the things that make a good story. We'll get to that at the end. So we're just going to get going, I guess, and talk first about focus. And focus is everything in what we're doing. It really is the thing that matters most. And so when you're looking and you're putting something together, your focus before you even go out the door, if you're going to be news gathering or before you make a phone call, you should have an idea what the focus of your story is going to be. And so that is the piece of information that is the most important. So out of all the information I have, what matters the most? What is the most interesting thing? What does the audience need to know right now? What is a piece of information that changes things or moves the story forward? If it's a story that's been developing over time, what's the new piece of that? What am I trying to say? And the bottom line really is, what is it that I want my audience to take away from this? What do I want people to learn and to take away? And so we've really got to be thinking about this as we go. One of the things I tell my students is when they're writing, to think of that focus statement, to think of one sentence that will sum up what you're doing. You write it at the top of your page, and everything you do from that point on should relate and go back to that sentence that you've come up with. And that should sort of help guide you through your story and make it a little bit easier. So how do you find your focus? Usually it's someone doing something for a reason. In broadcast journalism, that is really often the way this goes, or an organization is doing something for a reason, but it's almost always who's doing what and why, what is happening. If you can sit down and ask yourself that, that's probably going to give you your focus statement pretty quickly. And it really matters that you know this and that you can act from that, because your audience is busy. We have to grab their interest. We have to know going in what we want to say. We have to tell them right away. This matters, so I need you to listen up. So we're going to just look at this. Here's a little bit of an exercise. And Angel, I'm actually going to ask you, and Sarah, maybe if you're in there as well, we're going to talk about what is the most important part of this story right now. So if we're looking at this, a water main broke last night, caused some flooding in Montreal. 50 people were forced out of their homes. They're staying with their friends. The pipe was last inspected in 2018. It was supposed to last another decade. The Jacques Cartier Bridge, which is a huge bridge going into Montreal, closed to traffic in both directions. What is the most important part of that story right now? Sarah.
As a Montrealer, I'm going to say the Jacques Cartier Bridge is closed to traffic in both directions. But
Yes.
as a news person, about 50 people were forced out of their homes.
Yeah, I know. It's really tough, and we have to sort of gauge between
That was
those
a
things.
trick question.
The thing I would probably start with would be the bridge, because that's the thing that happens right now. And if someone is driving towards the bridge, I
Yes.
want them to know before they hit that they're going to have to turn. The 50 people, though, that is critical information as well that people need to know. So you're absolutely right. How about this one? What would be my first line of this one? An exterminator in Drummondville, Quebec says rats like sewers. Nathaniel Levy of Maheu Extermination was talking about the outbreak of rats in a hospital. The local health authority says 30 rats have been captured by exterminators since Wednesday, and the problem is mostly in the cafeteria of the hospital. So what would be my first line of that story?
I'm going to go with Nathaniel Levy
That there's
line.
an outbreak of rats
Yeah.
in the Shawinigan Hospital. Yes,
Yes.
exactly. 30 rats have been captured since Wednesday. Absolutely. That's the focus. That's the thing that's going to grab people. They're going to say, what? It's not that rats like sewers. Like, we all know that. That's information that exists. It's out there. That's not a surprise. But what is the thing that is going to grab me and make me listen to the rest of your story? It's the fact that there's this outbreak of rats in the hospital. Here's one too. What would the focus of this story be? We have to read right through.
Sorry, yeah, I'm just reading.
What should be the first thing that we talk about in this story? Is it that there are two candidates competing for a city council seat, or is it something else?
I think it's the Campbell says she's noticed the lopsided ratio.
Yeah, there's a gender imbalance. There's an imbalance. You know, they want to see more balance on council. That's the focus of that story. But you see, we don't really get to that until later. And so it's really important as we're putting our story together that we're thinking, what do they need to know? What's going to grab them right off the bat? And make sure that that is the first thing that we're talking about in our story. We're going to talk about active voice and passive voice. Which is more active here? The cats are playing the piano, or the piano is played by the cats?
The cats are playing the piano for sure.
Cats are playing the piano. Remember, this goes back to somebody doing something for a reason. We don't know why they're playing the piano, but they are,
Because
presumably.
it's darn cute.
Exactly. Darn cute. Cats are playing the piano. That's active. Somebody doing something. So we're going to look at some sentences here. How to make these more active. How about this one? The climber was freed by rescuers. How do we make that one more active? So that it's not something being done to somebody, it's somebody doing something.
Rescuers free the climber.
Rescuers free the climber. How about this one?
Police arrested the thieves.
Arrested the thieves. The chips were eaten by me.
I ate those chips.
All the time. The dog was walked by the girl.
And the girl walked the dog.
Dog, exactly. So this is the thing. We want to make them more active. So here, okay, there we go. I ate the chips, the girl walked the dog. Somebody doing something for a reason. That's the most active way. That's how the ear listens. And we have to think about this because your ear can't go back and find it again. When you're reading, it's easy. If I miss something while I'm reading, I can just go back to the start of the line or the start of the paragraph, and I can read it again, and I can get all the information that I missed. But people are doing things, and when we're listening to the radio or when we're watching a story on television, if we take away our attention for just a second, we can miss a really important part of that story. So we have to make it as easy as we possibly can for the listener or the viewer of our story. And so keeping our sentences active really does help because that's how we process things. Moving forward. So here, back to the rats. How do we make this one more active? There are two sentences in this one where we could make it more active. And this goes back to that somebody doing something. So there are two sentences here. One of them is the first one. And it's not really somebody, it's something. But an exterminator says sewers are usually the way rats enter buildings. An exterminator says Rats usually enter buildings through the sewers.
Yes.
That would be more active, right? What about the 30 rats line?
So again, I think this is like a simple one like the last examples. Exterminators have captured 30 rats since Wednesday.
Yeah, this is one of the most common things that I correct with my radio newsroom audio journalism course. We really do have a tendency, for some reason, and I'm not quite sure why, but we have a tendency to flip those around. And it's something just to really keep in mind because it really changes the way your writing flows, and it really brings it to life in a much better way.
I think that's especially true with numbers.
Oh, yeah.
You often see no, like people want to put the number at the start of the sentence, and like that's often that can be correct, but making it not a passive voice
Oh,
uh,
yeah. Yeah,
also
yeah, yeah.
important.
$150. That's how much it's going to cost you to.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I see that. I see that quite often too. Definitely something, I mean, maybe there's a place for it occasionally, but not something we want to do all the time.
Mhm.
Um, Forward facing, and particularly for news, this is a little less of a concern if you're doing some, current affairs or you're doing sort of more featurey things or, podcast writing and things like that. But if you're going to be doing more of a news sort of approach to things, this is something to really be thinking about. It's really easy to sort of start with once upon a time. Or to start sort of at the back end of something and give the context first. And for some reason, we like to do this for some reason, I think, just to kind of help people get into it in a way. But we really do need to start with what is happening right now. What is the thing that is going to push this story forward? We don't want to be looking backward. The thing happened, we can report on that, but we always want to try to be helping the audience see how this affects them and how this affects things going forward. So we watch the news. We don't watch history, right? It's called the news for a reason. So why do I care today? What is it that I care about today? If it's an ongoing story, what is the biggest development that is happening right now? What's happening today or in the future? We can tell people this happened, but I'd rather kind of prepare them for what's coming as well and give the context of what happened. So what do you need to know right now? That context comes after you give me the headline. So we're going to go ahead and look, here's an example. If we were going to write this story here, and this story starts, as you can see, today's Friday. And here we're looking at this story. On Wednesday night, there was a gathering of people angry about the Montreal Canadiens' loss. It turned into a protest in downtown Montreal. Some windows of businesses were broken by protesters. There were charges laid against 5 people. They're expected in court today. What is the news in all of this information? What is the piece of news? And this is a sort of copy that I do see quite often, starting with, there was this thing that happened on Wednesday. What's the news in this story?
5 people are expected in court today.
Exactly, exactly. So that's what we start with. 5 people are expected in court after a protest in downtown, or after people protested over the Montreal Canadiens' loss on Wednesday. And then we get into the other stuff, 5 people face charges. But we start with the thing that's happening right now, that's happening today, that moves this story forward. And then we get into the context. What do we mean when we say writing for the ear?
I think so we were just talking before we started this call. I'm such a print girl. So this is actually a proper exercise for me. Writing in such a way that it makes sense for someone listening. And just as you said before, like you can't go backwards when you're listening to something or when you're watching something as opposed to when you're reading it.
Yeah, 100%. People are busy. People are so busy, and we've got to write simply, we've got to keep it fresh, and we've got to keep it active. I'm going to play a little something here.
Hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
This is brilliant writing for broadcast. This is fantastic. He introduces himself. You killed my father. But there's so much there, and yet it's so short. It's so simple. It's so easy to understand. This right here is a beautiful example of writing for the ear. It does all kinds of things. It gives me history. It gives me it looks forward. It introduces the people who are, in the discussion in just a couple of short lines. This is writing for the ear. So listeners are busy. Listeners are doing things. They're merging into traffic. They're making pancakes. They're cutting up bananas for their baby. They're, doing all kinds of things. And so we really need to be thinking about making it as easy as we possibly can for them. And one of the things that I actually tell my radio students, my audio journalism students, is to write as though you're writing and explaining it for a 9-year-old, which is not to say that our listeners or our viewers have the intelligence of a 9-year-old. It's not saying that at all. It's just saying that when you're busy doing all these other things and life is competing for your attention, that's about how much attention you're able to give to what you're listening to or what you're reading at any given time. So we really want to make it as simple as we possibly can for them. So that means active, forward-facing copy. Short sentences. If you're writing long sentences, I get lost. I can't keep up with you. And if my attention is pulled away for even a second, it's gone. So we really want to keep those sentences short, keep everything simple. Don't be formal or fancy. One of the things I repeat the most is, would you say that? Would you say those words, or would you put it that way? If they're repeating something that the police said or something that a business, person said in an interview, would you say it that way? If you wouldn't say it that way to a friend, it shouldn't be in your broadcast copy. You should write the way you speak. Write simply, write intelligently, but just don't be formal, don't be fancy. Keep it very, very straightforward. One thought per line. If you put too many thoughts in your sentences, I get lost. Quite often, you can look at a sentence and you can just divide it in 2 sentences. And it makes it so much easier to understand. Just that little pause, that little breath, finishing a thought and then moving on to the next thought. It just makes it so much easier for the person who's listening. You can write powerful sentences, really make them active, put things in so that people are doing things. Be thinking about telling a story. Even though you're telling something that is short, obviously, when you're writing a radio story, it might only be a minute long. A story that you're writing that's video might be, a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes at most, but you're still telling a story. It's not just facts. You want to make it powerful. You want to make it have some impact and some meaning. If it's meaningful, people will take more in and they'll keep it. So be thinking about that. So I'm going to read a piece of copy, and then we're going to read it again, written for the ear. Okay, so something that you might see in a written story is what I'll read first, and then I'll read it again, and we'll just think about how it's different. And I'll show it to you in a moment. So for the I, let's say I'm reading, the number of females serving in Winnipeg's police force is declining, the services chief said at a recruitment event Saturday. And he says he's taking additional measures to attract more women to the force. If you're busy and doing things, you're probably missing a chunk of that, right? Okay, so there's the sentence, the number of females up at the top. But for the ear, Winnipeg's police chief wants to see more women join the force. He says the number's dropping, and at a recruitment event Saturday, he said he's working to change that. It's so simple, and it's how we speak. It's all the same information. It's all there, but it's easier. It's easier to take in. It's easier to understand, to digest, to keep, and that's our goal. So I'm going to do another one. Severe weather conditions were reported in Vancouver on Friday morning with microbursts reaching velocities as strong as 90 kilometers an hour, sending 2 individuals scrambling to escape hazardous situations, which included downed trees and damaged power lines, which hydro crews said to avoid. You pick up none of that.
None.
There was windy.
Zero. Yeah.
Right?
It's Vancouver, maybe?
Yeah, and wind. Okay, 2 people scrambled to escape falling trees in a windstorm this morning in Vancouver. Microbursts cause winds up to 90 kilometers an hour. Hydro crews say to avoid damaged power lines. Even better, you could say hydro crews say to avoid damaged power lines after. But just in terms of simplifying, short sentences, 1 thought really per line. There were winds, people scrambled, hydro crews say watch out. Simple, simple, simple. That's our priority. Avoiding big words. So words like apprehended. Would you say police apprehended the thief? Would you say that in real life? Probably not. Deceased. The person is deceased. No, they died. They're dead. Incarcerated. Would you say the thief was incarcerated? You'd say they were jailed or they were put in prison. Transported. I hear that one all the time. Transported to hospital. No, they were taken to hospital. I wouldn't say I transported my grandma to the mall. I took her there. Residence. I'm going to my residence for dinner. No, I'm going home. I mean, you might say a senior's residence. That sort of is the one place where you would.
Sure.
But generally speaking, if you're talking about someone's home, it's their house, their home, their apartment. Adolescent, you'd say teenager. Utilized, used.
I love especially that's my, like, I feel like every editor has specific words that they hate, and utilized is one of mine. So I'm excited.
Oh, it's a bugaboo, total bugaboo.
Oh my goodness, I hate it so much.
Yeah.
There's never a good time to use it.
You use like
you use a thing.
I know, 100%. No, and I see this all the time. Take these out. Just simple. Say what you say.
Because it's press release speak, right? Like, apprehended is a thing the police say in their press release.
Yeah, they caught.
Yeah,
they stopped. They arrested. Yeah, simple. So here's one. Keeping things conversational. What is the story here? What is the thing? If I was going to say, what would the lead line be here? Conflagration is another word I would never use in broadcast.
I worked with somebody once who worked with, like, his previous editor. Like, he wasn't allowed to use 3-syllable words. Everything had to be 2 syllables, which was really tough sometimes. But like a particularly interesting writing exercise.
That would be interesting to do, actually, as a writing exercise. You're giving me ideas now, Sarah.
Okay. Okay, so to answer your question, I'm going to say Maui residents have asked why Hawaii's famous emergency warning system didn't alert them.
They want to know why the emergency warning system didn't work?
Yeah.
That is the story. You're 100% right. Yeah. And we've got all this other stuff. Simple, they had to make desperate escapes from the flames.
Is it famous?
I guess it must be. I don't know. I pulled it from real copies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a while ago.
No. I'm sorry.
Long enough ago, I don't remember. So,
okay.
The conversational simple. Key to a really great story. Just to keep moving about things that we're talking about in a story. A strong character. If you can get a character, if you can make me care about somebody, I'm going to care about your whole story. And a really good example of this I found was one time I was listening to a radio story, and one network was talking about cuts to science funding, and they were talking about like 100 different researchers are affected, but they didn't go into any detail. They just said that, and it was it. And I mean, I care, but I don't really understand the scope. I don't really understand the impact or what it means. And then I heard another story where they talked with someone who had been doing this research for like years with some type of cricket. And the way their leg flipped was so fast and so strong that it was like being studied as a model for like, the space shuttle kind of thing,
Wow.
in terms of trajectory of and velocity. And so this researcher, she had been studying these crickets for like 3 years, and then all her research, once the funding's cut, her research just goes out the window. It's just like it never happened. And then I cared, we put that story, here's somebody I can understand working on something and caring about it so much for 3 years, and then seeing it just go down the drain. That I care about. Or you could go to an event, let's say, where maybe they're giving hockey equipment to kids who can't afford hockey equipment. You could go and you could talk to, 4 kids who say, it's great. Or you could find one kid who loves hockey, who has all kinds of hockey players on her wall, who just can't play because her family can't afford the equipment. But now she's going to be able to fulfill her dream and go play hockey. I care so much, when I hear that story. It really captures your attention. It captures your heart. You're hearing about someone that you can really get behind, and you want this child to succeed. That's a good story. That's storytelling. So you're not going out to try to, get as many people as you can. That doesn't make your story stronger necessarily. Work smarter, not harder. Find that person you can hang your story on, because it really creates an impact that sometimes having lots of characters just doesn't do. So really, one person's story, pick one of them, and see if you can go from there. That is really much more impactful. Continuing on, we'll just quickly talk about a couple other things. We just have a little bit more time here. Using clips in a story. If you're choosing clips for your video story or for your audio story, you want them to be relatively short. I always tell people like 8 to 15 seconds-ish, unless it's really spectacular and you're like making the world open up for me. Then you can take more time. But try to keep it relatively concise. Make sure they're clear. Sometimes we've got clips of people where we don't understand what they're saying or it doesn't make sense. If they take more time to say something, then give them more time, so that it does make sense. We can do that, absolutely. There aren't really hard and fast rules, and sometimes it's the rhythm of your story that's going to dictate what you're doing and who you're talking to. Some people just talk slower, but we want it to be understandable. Often, the clip, if you have a bit of emotion and really reveals how people feel, that's a good clip. That's something that really kind of stays with me and helps the story come to life. So if you speak with someone and they, get a little emotional and they're comfortable with you using the clip, then great. That's a really good clip to use. Or somebody who's angry, and all fired up and they're just going, that's a good clip to use too. So really be looking for sort of those moments where you're really sort of seeing the humanity of a person, or you're really seeing that story come to life, because those are the ones that really do something within your story. It puts the speaker at the scene. If you're talking to someone at a game, and their team just won and they're so excited and they're there and you can hear everything or see everything behind them. It brings it home. That's what we want. It tells you something the reporter can't. I can say all kinds of things in my story. I can give you all kinds of facts. I can do all kinds of things, but I can't give you the emotion. I can't give you the feeling. I can't do that in the way that somebody standing there telling you this is how I feel can do that. So we really want to try to have something, have a reason for them being there. They're doing something that you, the reporter, can't. And it's memorable, you remember it after you hear the story. This is a story that I'm just going to play and listen for what the clip says, and what the person says in the clip. This is my Concordia journalism students work with students in Ganawage at the high school there, and they produce stories that run on CBC. And this is one of the stories that some of the kids put together. And it's about the ironworking tradition in Ganawage. But listen to what the clip says. So we're just going to give this a quick listen.
Strength and fearlessness of many Mohawks gives them an advantage in the field, which helps them support their families. But ironworking involves a lot of hard labor. Thomas Two Rivers has been an ironworker for 8 years.
You climb into steel, you're constantly maneuvering hundreds of pounds of steel into place.
And besides physical labor, ironworking also comes with many risks.
The hardest part of my job is just getting used to the heights and being like open air, walking on sometimes wobbly steel, and getting used to that, and also constantly having to be aware of your surroundings so you don't get hurt with beams coming down around you.
But despite the dangers, Mohawk ironworkers helped to build the New York skyline and key projects like the Mercier Bridge in Montreal. The century-old legacy continues as more Mohawks brave the heights and make a positive contribution to their home community of Ganawage. Ronan Daibo, Concordia Reports, Ganawage.
So as you hear in that story, he's talking about what it's like to be up there and, looking down and the wobbly steel and you can feel it. He takes you there in a way that the reporter can't. And so that's what your clips should be doing. when you're writing into your clips, you want to prepare the viewer or the listener. So you heard there that he introduced the speaker. So we knew there, that he was going to be speaking. You don't want to tell them exactly what they're about to hear. You want to just sort of set it up so that they're listening. You don't want to use the same words writing into the clips. So if you're saying, the people say they're angry, and then you've got someone say, we're angry. You want to have it a little bit different. So just be thinking about that as you write into your clips, that, you're not saying exactly the same thing that they're going to hear right away when they hear the speaker talking. But echoing coming out of the clips sometimes can work, if they say something like, and we're going to be really worrying about that in the future. And you could write out of it saying, worrying about that in the future and waiting to see what happens. You can write that way. So sometimes that can be powerful, but you don't want to do that writing into the clips. Really, you're just setting it up for the listener or the viewer. In terms of intros, we're kind of nearing the end of the time, but when we're writing our intros, this is something that I think a lot of people have difficulty with. It's like the appetizer. Just think of your intro as the appetizer. You're preparing the person for the rest of the meal. So you just want to give them a little taste of what's coming, and show them that, they want to stick around for this. This meal is going to be good, so stay. So you don't want to tell the story, you want to sell the story. Keep them listening. So just the most basic facts. And here too, we have to think of our focus. This all goes back to the focus. I should know in that first line of your intro what your story is going to be about. You can kind of set the emotional tone for the story. Think about that. Give a little context. If it's in a newscast, maybe it'll give some continuity between the stories, but you really don't want to sell everything in the story. You don't want to tell me everything. And I find sometimes students, when they first start writing intros, that's something they really like to do, is to put a whole bunch of stuff into that intro. It's just 2 lines. You don't need to say that much. So we're going to just sort of move ahead, because I think we're just about at the end. Just remember, make sure your script's ready for air. Look for capitalization and things like that. Be thinking about, reading your script. Be thinking about the fact that sometimes other people might be reading your script, and you've got to think about that as well. Make sure that everything's correct. This really matters as we're writing for broadcast. Even if no one's going to see your script but you, this matters so much. Make sure there are no typos, there are no missing words, no extra words, because you'll bounce over that. When you're reading it, sometimes if you're in a hurry, you'll read what's there. Make sure things are correct. Make sure people's names and titles are correct. Capitalize. If we can't be trusted on small things, we can't be trusted on big things. So we always have to think about that, even if people are just hearing our script and not reading it. So I guess we'll just open it to questions, if there are any questions, and just say thank you so much for being along for this.
Thank you so much, Kristy. This has been wonderful. Just in case anybody is shy, please, again, I just want to remind you, you can drop your questions in the chat and I will read them out. Just as we get going here, I wondered, it's not quite about writing and more about finding focus, but I find often new reporters have big ideas that they want to write about. They want to write about like reconciliation or like youth criminal justice. And my question is always like, okay, what about that though? Right? Like this isn't like an overview essay. This is the news. So what about it? So do you have any advice for people in that position where they kind of know that they want to talk about a bigger issue or something that's really meaningful to them? How can they get at it in kind of a newsy way?
I think a big thing is when we think about something like reconciliation or youth, that's a theme. That's not a story.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't want to be just thinking about a theme. Think of, here too, if you can think of one person who's affected by one issue within that theme, you can attack that theme through that person, through that one person's story. You can address the bigger issue, absolutely. But unless you've got that one person or that one angle that you can get into it with, it's just going to be too big. And to have that meaning, the biggest thing we can do as journalists is find ways to make things meaningful for the listener or for the viewer, because that's when they're going to keep it. We don't learn. If it doesn't mean anything to us, we're not learning. But when something affects me and I'm drawn into that story, I am here with you. I will stay with you, and whatever you tell me, I want to hear it. And so be thinking of it in terms of story, be thinking of it in terms of one person or one issue or one event or one thing that you can attach this story to. But for me, it really is find that human angle as much as you possibly can, because that's the thing that creates the meaning, and that's the thing that, you know, creates the understanding and the knowledge and the engagement with the listener or the viewer.
Super. I'm going to do one more. While we're waiting. It has also been my experience that new reporters can come back with just a lot of tape, just so much tape. And then, you know, if it's a tight deadline or, you know, even if it's not, that's just like a ton of work to go through. What would you recommend reporters do sort of at the outset before they're going to do all the interviews and, you know, sort of gathering for their stories to try to streamline that process a bit?
Yeah, I think here that whole finding the focus of your story and really knowing your focus can really benefit you. My whole thing is to be as efficient and as effective as you can. And so if you go out and you know the story that you're trying to tell, and things can change. I mean, it's okay, you can shift. But if you go into it and you have an idea of what you want to do and you are bringing someone into your story, they should be serving a purpose. They're there for a reason. They're not just there to give us all the information, you know, and if there's information that's widely available online, don't get that in your interview. You know, if you know that their facts are all there and, you know, you don't need to do that. Just do the interview, get the parts that you need from that person and leave it at that. The other thing is to ask open-ended questions that will do the hard work for you. So if you're not sure of something, you know, you can ask them, okay, what can you tell me? What matters the most here? You can ask that of them. They can help you figure out and focus things down. Obviously, you're a journalist, you're interpreting, you're taking, you know, you can't just take everything at face value, but sometimes, you know, when you go into that interview, really having a sense of what it is that you need and what it is that you want to get out of that interview, it really makes it easier and it really makes it shorter. And try to only ask it. I mean, especially if you're tight for time, try to only ask a few questions if you can. And one of the things too, when you're writing, you know, when you find a clip, be really listening. In an interview, you have to listen, you know, be really paying attention to what they're saying, because you probably will hear the clip that is going to make sense. You're like, I remember, and it takes a while to develop. It's like a muscle. But once you get doing that, and once you've done this for a while, you have a moment when you're doing that interview where you just go, that's it. And you check your time. Okay. And you know exactly where that clip is, you know what it is, you know how you're going to write to it. It's a skill, it's something that develops, but if you can sort of start developing that skill right from the get-go, it'll really serve you well. It really helps.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Okay, so seeing no questions in the chat, seeing no hands raised, we're gonna wrap up for today. Thank you so much, Kristy, for being here, for teaching us about broadcast writing. Thank you for those of you who joined us. If you have any feedback, please send it to canadian.programs@jhr.ca. And if you're into this kind of thing, please stay tuned to JHR's and IJA's social media for future entries in the series. We'll be doing them between now and December 19th. So thank you so much, and take care.